Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, or मैं बहुत खुश हूँ आजकल because you know what? I have been having a good time making content, tons of fun stuff to cover. But when it comes to video games, I'm already happy starting off the year with the Dead Space remake. Now I know before people go in, wow, is this what gaming has come to? Getting excited for a remake? Modern AAA gaming is dead! Look, we can all be negative, but sometimes it's time to put on a happy face and just realize maybe sometimes things are good, right? Now, of course, I totally agree. There are a lot of modern games that leave me a little sad, all right, just sad. But Dead Space Remake is one that I can actually really enjoy. And again, I know it's a game from 2008, but I want to start off with just definitions, okay? Here at Some Ordinary Gamers, we have a little bit of an educational educational program too. So let's talk about remakes versus remasters real quick. Look, I'm not too excited about remasters. Anytime a game company says, hey guys, here's the remaster of a Shin Megami Tensei 3, anytime I can take your game, jack up its resolution myself, double up the frame rate myself, which that game didn't do, then I don't really care, okay? I'm a PC gamer, so I'm used to just going into the system settings, going into the graphical options, and doing that myself. Oh, but sometimes we touched up a texture or two with AI. Yeah, could care less. Now, when it comes to remakes are typically our developers reattempt at an entire game that they made. Look, no matter what happens, every time a game gets made, there's always some limitation of hardware that prevents a developer from actually seeing their dream completely through. Now, back in the original PlayStation 1 days, Resident Evil 2 absolutely blew our minds. We loved it. It's probably one of the best Resident Evil games ever made. Now, Resident Evil 2 Remake, I know there's a bit of a division on this, but I generally consider it to be one of the best Resident Evil games as well. And the remake really meant for Capcom and the development team to go back into their original vision and finally reattempt it with modern hardware and modern, systems. Now that we've got the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series, we've got stronger systems, SSDs, ray tracing implementations, you name it. So obviously, EA Games, which, by the way, I guess making fun of EA really did mean something because lately they've been pushing out single-player bangers. We've got a new Jedi Star Wars game coming out. We've got Need for Speed Unbound, which is a classically great take on arcade racers in modern 2022, 2023. And then you've got Dead Space. So EA Games and Motive Studios actually went down, reattempted the game, and basically made Dead Space for the modern audience. And in a good way. So obviously from 2008, I wanted to really just look at this game again. And I was kind of excited because I've been always wanting to replay Dead Space because the last time I played the game was literally back in 2010, like that era where the game literally came out for the 360 and the PlayStation 3. And while I remember the key story beats, like the introduction, the ending, some of the boss battles, generally the story of it, the Ishimura, because I haven't played it for so long, I had no idea, really, what I was missing when it came to this remake. Now, obviously, playing through the game again, it is a shot-for-shot, beat-for-beat remake of the original. You've got the same story, the same dialogue, you've got some new extensions into, like, the lore around the Unitologists, the Ishimura, Isaac. So, realistically, if you play this game, it'll prepare you better for the barrage of terms that you're going to be facing in Dead Space 2. So what are the key differences? Okay, the key differences go like this. The entire Ishimura is completely explorable. Now, in the original game, you had 13 chapters, which you still do in Dead Space Remake, and the key difference here is that, whereas in the original, when you finished a chapter, you go to a tram station, you get onto the tram, and it would effectively be the loading screen to the next chapter. So in this game, because we have SSDs and newer hardware, they use the same tram station, but instead of actually making it a chapter-to-chapter situation, you can fully explore every deck of the USG Ishimura. So you can backtrack, you can come here and there, and the game really incentivizes you to do that because they introduce a new security system. So throughout the game, you have 3 security clearances and a master clearance that you unlock through a side quest, and you can then go back and forth onto the Ishimura, go into the depths, and unlock newer upgrades for your weapons and armor that way. So that's an actual thing that exists. It's got a bunch of side quests, and by bunch, I mean 3. It's got 3 side quests total that you can use to upgrade your character's security clearance, like I said earlier, and also to uncover the mystery surrounding the Unitologists, the marker, the creepy cult aspects of the video game. You know, that in the original, while they mentioned it, it wasn't really built upon until Dead Space 2. So like I said, if you play this remake and then play Dead Space Space 2 now, the game actually makes more sense than before because it flows into the entire franchise that much better. So, of course, that all being said, other than those differences, there is one more that I think really, really makes Dead Space Remake a solid game, and that's the Intensity Director. Do you remember games like Left 4 Dead 1 and 2? Well, remember how those games actually had like the director mode, as they called it, which is basically a feature they put into the game so that if you were doing too well, it would spawn in like a special enemy, like a tank, or something to basically, give you a bit of a challenge. It would basically make the game tense, but not overly tense. It would constantly keep you on your toes. Games like Resident Evil 4 kind of do this too, where like the amount of drops they give you are based upon how well you're doing in the game. Very subtly. But Dead Space does this in a way that's near perfection. So first off, the game will spawn in enemies, all right? And when you do backtrack in Dead Space Remake, it's cool to see the dead enemies that you once killed like 2 hours ago, but it'll spawn newer enemies if you're doing too well. It'll give you ammo if, accordingly, well enough. It'll keep you basically tensed up the entire way through. So even beyond spawning in enemies or giving in items, there were times where I walked into a deck where initially all the lights were on, everything was cool. 2 hours later, when I'm backtracking, the lights are flickering. Half the area is empty. There's fog everywhere. The necromorphs are screaming all around me. They're not spawning. There are things breaking all the way around me. It constantly keeps you on your toes. One of my favorite moments in the remake was this one point where on the tram, where you're constantly using to backtrack between the Ishimura, at one point, you literally stopped. And then for 20-25 seconds, the door slightly opened. There was screaming all around you, things moving around the tram, and I was in one corner. You got to understand, this tram is maybe 8 feet wide. That's it, 8 feet. That's it. That's the amount you get. So you're standing in one end with your plasma cutter up, waiting for something to bust in, or the whole tram to goddamn collapse. I thought it was a story moment, but no, that was the in-game intensity director literally just keeping me on my toes. There were moments where I was using the bench, and as soon as I was done, enemies would spawn. So there is literally a feeling of no safety on the Ishimura, which I think is amazing for a survival horror game. If you're going to make me feel unsafe throughout the entire experience, there were moments where I had the headphones on, I was walking around the area, and I just constantly kept hearing screaming from the distance. So I thought maybe there was an enemy in the area, but there wasn't. The game just literally is trying to keep me on my toes the entire time. And that's about one of the best features of Dead Space Remake that I've honestly come across with. Now, beyond all of it, I think we'll get into each aspect really carefully. So graphically, the game is obviously a remake. It looks really nice. They've got everything is made for the ground up. Obviously, they've got new character models, new textures, new environments. Because the game is not linear anymore, you're constantly flowing back and forth between each area, so you're typically noticing things a lot more. You have more chance to go back and look at things up close. But alongside all of it, what really matters to me graphically is some of the new features they've added. So they've got ray tracing ambient occlusion, which doesn't really add too much. I guess it fills up some of the ambient occlusion around. I've been playing the game with or without it because I game between Linux and a Windows virtual machine. So ray tracing can work, or it couldn't work underneath Linux. Generally, I haven't noticed too much of a key difference there. Visually, though, every other aspect works really well. I think it's definitely inferior to Callisto Protocol, but I think that's okay simply because Callisto Protocol just looked that much better than every other game out there, but looks obviously aren't everything. I think from a gameplay perspective, Dead Space Remake absolutely has it beat. As far as the survival horror game is considered, I remember back in 2008, even Dead Space, when it initially dropped, wasn't critiqued all that well. I think it was a bit polarizing, but now to see everybody appreciate a proper single-player survival horror game, because at the end of the day, Dead Space Remake and Dead Space 1 are solid games. Gameplay, it stands up, all right? Constantly, it will introduce introduce you new enemy types that you'll constantly have to be using stasis on. You'll have to dismember them differently. Some of the enemies will have like armor on them too, so dismembering them can be a little bit difficult, or you might have to get better with your aim, figure out different things on the fly. That's still Dead Space to its core. But one of the things that I love about the gameplay the most is obviously the immersion. If you remember, that's one of the things that I love about Callisto Protocol so much, was the fact that there are no HUD elements in the game. Your health is on your back, your stasis meter is on the back of your arm, and you're walking around the area, and there is no HUD element to distract you. The immersion is all the way there. One of the things that I love about this game versus other horror games is you can actually listen to the audio logs and the video logs as you play. Other games like just have you open up a different screen just so you can listen to this 2-minute long audio log while you're actually playing through the game. Why? They're audio logs. Just play them while I actually play the core game. It's such a pet peeve of mine that I have to mention it in this video. But of course, gameplay is solid. It's Dead Space as always. They've incorporated some of the newer games like Dead Space 2 and 3's gameplay types. I believe impaling enemies is there, where you can grab items with telekinesis and pin necromorphs to the wall. Not that I was ever really doing it in the game anyways, but that's still an option that's there. But yeah, that's pretty much where the gameplay comes into. It's survival horror at its core. You'll constantly be scrounging for items, weapons, you name it. And of course, the game gives you enough money and items that honestly, by the end of it, I was pretty much upgraded all the way through armor-wise, and I had 2 fully upgraded weapons, a plasma cutter and the rifle, and like half of the flamethrower. So that's one thing I wanted to bring it up to. There are different difficulties. You've got normal, hard, and impossible, like the original game. Impossible difficulty is literally just hard, except the game will auto knock you down to hard if you die once. So if you want to get like an exclusive suit and like bragging rights, you have to basically complete the game on hard without actually dying once, which isn't really that difficult at the end of the day. Dead Space is not what I would consider to be a hard title. It can be frustrating. There was one part of the game where I just kept dying because I failed to misread something. But other than that, it's a pretty easy game if you know what you're doing, if you know your survival horror well enough. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. Now, obviously, as far as a remake is considered, I think this game is great. I think if you've never played Dead Space before, or even if you have, definitely pick this game up. Listen, if you haven't ever played Dead Space before, I strongly believe this is a good price. I finished the game in 13 hours, which is great for a survival horror game, by the way. Almost felt like I sped through it, to be honest, but I think it's great for like $70 if you want a good, proper single player title. Again, if that's a lot, then definitely wait for a sale. No shame on that. But it is definitely a game that I firmly believe is still worth full price. Now, if you've played Dead Space in the past, pretty recently, I would actually wait for a sale. There's still not too much different in this game that's going to warrant you actually rebuying it that quickly. Because the story, while it adds, doesn't fundamentally change anything, and the entire maps, looking back at the original Dead Space, it is still a very shot-for-shot, very faithful remake, even without the fully explorable Ishimura. So again, moving on to that, one more thing that I wanted to get into was the PC gaming quirks. So obviously, when Callisto Protocol dropped, it was one of the worst PC launches for its time, for a while even. Now, the way that this game does it is it does the ability for you to calculate shaders. If you remember with Callisto Protocol, you effectively, if you were a PC gamer, had to calculate every shader as you played, which meant no matter what hardware you had, you were stuttering no matter what. So with Dead Space, they actually have you wait for like 5-10 minutes at the beginning of the game, the first launch, to pre-build or pre-cache shaders. Now, even with that done, there were still some noticeable stutters I've seen towards the latter half of the game that I can't actually not, mention. There are stutters in this game, but it's not as bad as Callisto Protocol. Generally speaking, the PC port job is good. It's got some ray tracing. It's got AMD FSR and DLSS. For some reason, every time I boot the game up, it just constantly knocks the DLSS back to balance instead of quality, which again, easily you could change. It has full ultra-wide support and full frame rate support for like higher frame rates. So you definitely get a pretty, I would say, solid to good PC port experience out of it. Now, that being said, that's about all I really have to say on Dead Space Remake. It is probably one of the best, most faithful games that I've seen when it comes to remakes, which, again, when it came to the original Dead Space, you want it to kind of reflect that original magic, and I think it's there. So yeah, if you wanted to get into Dead Space Remake, this is by far the gold standard for what a remake should be. Look, I used to think RE2 Remake was like my solid pick, but this might be a better remake than even that. And for me to say that is a pretty big deal after the amount of hours I put into that Resident Evil 2 remake. So again, I'm going to get into my Impossible run right now. I want to play the game. I want to get into it. One more mention, obviously I was going to mention this, was the Steam Deck. Now, when this game first dropped, the Steam Deck was crashing constantly, but ever since then, Valve pushed a hotfix to Proton, so you can actually play through Dead Space pretty well on the Steam Deck. Obviously, I locked the settings down to 30 frames when I'm docked, 40 when I'm handheld, and generally it runs well. It's running on medium settings with FSR, so if you want to play on the Steam Deck, it absolutely works. The battery life is not there. I think you'll probably get an hour and 10 minutes max, which if you're in for a Dead Space session, that's like nothing. But ladies and gentlemen, yes, this is me, Mudahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.